Hello, and welcome to the Thin End of the Wedge, the podcast where experts from around the world share new and interesting stories about life in the ancient Middle East. My name's John. Each episode I talk to friends and colleagues and get them to explain their work in a way we can all understand. This episode we hear from two guests. Each has established themselves in their own right. I've invited them on together because of the collaboration they've formed. By combining their efforts, they produced results that either one alone could not have achieved. The trust and warmth in their partnership is something that gives me hope that this field is heading in the right direction. I'm especially glad to have them as guests, because a talk they gave together over the summer is part of the reason that this podcast exists. Our guests have been collaborating on texts from a small site called Tel Abu Antique. Although not a famous site, it's a good example of an unusual and very interesting type of settlement dating to the period of King Hammurabi of Babylon. While archaeology has usually focused on palaces and temples, Abu Antique shows us the houses of ordinary people. It was home to gardeners. Now, these were no ancient capability Browns, or, for British listeners, Alan Titchmarshes. These gardeners were armed with far more than a trowel. Today we touch on several important topics that we're bound to return to in future episodes. The long history of looting of Iraqi sites, the significance of archaeological context, and the threats posed to sites by development works to provide necessary infrastructure for the people living nearby today. Recent archaeology sheds new light on texts that have been known for 100 years already. It reveals the daily rhythms of life in a small corner of the Babylonian countryside, on the front line of a famous empire. So get yourself a cup of tea, make yourself comfortable, and let's meet today's guests. Hello, and welcome to Thin End of the Wedge. Thank you very much for joining us.
Hello, John.
Thank you for your invitation. I would like to thank you for this nice project. It can make the communication between Syriologists easier by how we are thinking and how the other thinking can find that easy by your project.
Thank you for joining us. Could you tell us, please, who are you and what do you do?
I'm Jawdat. I'm an Syriologist and archaeologist in Iraqi State Board of Antiquities and Heritage, Baghdad.
My name is Rients de Boer. I work as an education officer at the University of Leiden in the Netherlands.
The two of you have been working together on texts from the site of Abu Antique. Could you give us an introduction to that site, please?
The site is located in about 26 kilometers southeast of Diwania district in the middle Euphrates in southern Iraq, and about 10 kilometers for the little town of Hannawiya. This site also located about 50 kilometers to the south of Babylon and 15 kilometers to the west of ancient Marad. The Abu Antique is oval shaped and its dimension about 308 and 180 meters. It's a very small mound and the maximum height about 1 meter in maximum height point. The city of Bikasi can be considered as a model of the life in southern Babylon. It is the only site in which excavation have taken place with these important results have been given to us. Abu Antique is destroyed by 2 canals of irrigation and looted with a huge area everywhere in Abu Antique, looted in different times.
What does this name Abu Antique mean?
Abu Antique comes from the antique. Antique is the local name for the cuneiform tablets. The local people around call the tablet antique. Okay, but because this site is looted for many times, the people knows very well this site consists a huge number of tablets. For that they so-called Abu Antique. Abu Antique was covered by marshland old and recent marshland. Until the 1994, the marshland is dried by Saddam regime. I think this name came at that time. And before that, the marshland founded according the availability of water or not. Because Abu Antik has looted heavily before, according to Rients de Boer study a lot of tablets from Yakhroum Shablum that looted in many years ago, about 100 or before.
And what about the ancient name? Do we know what that was?
The ancient name of Abu Antik belonged to the region, because the region of Abu Antik is a region of canals and agriculture at that time. I think this mean the region that related on the canals, it's not exact meaning, but I think the kasu is to tie in Akkadian, and the mouth. If the mouth come with canals, that means the entrance of that thing. I think Bikasi meaning the region that related with water. Dr. Ahmed Kamel gave a meaning for that, but I have a different viewpoint, because Dr. Ahmed Kamel in the first article gave a meaning, nozzle of the cup, because kasu is a cup, but our classification, the cup, the jar, and the shape of jars, this is our classification as scholars, not belong of them. And this jar, this shape of jar is separated in most of sites in all Mesopotamia in same period. This is different than Dr. Ahmed Kamel. He worked with the expedition for 2 seasons with them.
Your collaboration brings together two groups of material, doesn't it?
Jacob mentioned that the site of Tel Abu Antik was looted a long time ago. I actually did some research on those ancient looted tablets, and I think around 1910, so more than 100 years ago, locals must have been able to excavate at the site, because around that time, tablets that we can now trace back to Tel Abu Antik started to be published and started to be sold on the antiquities market. For a long time, we didn't know actually where these tablets came from, because they did form a coherent group. Even though the tablets were spread over, I think, dozens of collections around the world. Most of the tablets ended up in Yale, but we have tablets here in Leiden, in St. Petersburg, even in Finland, some in Baghdad, so around the world. Only very recently, due to Iraqi excavations that started in 1999 at Tel Abu Antik, when new texts were found, we were able to piece together the fact that the texts that were looted more than 100 years ago actually came from Tel Abu Antik. And these Iraqi excavations were led by Ahmed Kamel Mohammed between 1999 and 2007, when the Iraqis did 4 campaigns on Tel Abu Antik. Is that right, Jacob?
5 campaigns.
5.
From 1999 to 2002 for continued season, and the 5th season, 2007.
And what was found during these excavations?
The material that found there, it's very few area excavated from Abu Antik, about 80 and 60 meters. But they found more than 5,000 objects and artifacts. Pottery, cylinder seal, cuneiform tablets, terracotta, and other small finds. But the huge number was only the pottery and cuneiform tablets, about 1,600 tablets that I found there, and found it in houses. The expedition, they explain the region as an administrative wing of a palace, because they found a digger with one line of inscription, Egal Bikasi.
Okay, so we have a dagger which is labelled pretty clearly Palace of Bikasi.
Yes.
But it was found in an area of private housing.
The planning of area is exactly same, Tel Asmar and Ur, and it's very easy, you can say this is houses, not palace or administrative wing of palace. Please, friends, if you have...
I agree with you, Jacob, that some of the original excavators interpreted the site in a certain way, but it looks like it's a collection of private houses. And my interpretation, and yours is as well, that we cannot find any monumental architecture at Pikasi, Tel Abu Antik, in the part that has been excavated right now.
Should we interpret this then as houses that belong to people who work in the palace? And it's just that in the ancient world there isn't this sharp divide between someone's work life and their private life.
Yeah, I think you could say that. I'm not sure if all the people living in Pikasi actually worked for a central administrative entity or a palace, but the houses seem to be private houses.
An incredible number of texts were found at this site. What kind of progress have you been able to make so far?
What we've been doing the last couple of years is basically putting the old stuff that was looted more than 100 years ago from Pikasi together with the freshly excavated text by the Iraqis to tell more about the ancient archives, to find parallels between the texts that were found more than 100 years ago and recently found texts, and to find connections between those texts to say more about the settlement. Jacob?
We're working on Abu Antik materials, as Brent said, not a little while ago, because there are many contents that are related to each other, which through collecting and linking the content in it can reach very important result about the areas southern Babylon during the rule of first dynasty of Babylon. Almost all the text studied by Iraqi colleagues, by pieces and articles have been reviewed by me and Rients last time, and now I have necessary permission for my project. Part of it will be with Rients, I hope, to study all the remaining group of tablets. Just yesterday I have started working on a small group of them. I see the results are encouraging. If I can work on all of them, including the seals and the tablet were studied by the Iraqi colleagues.
Many of these texts talk about people who were described as gardeners. For the Babylonians, that means something really rather different from what it means in a modern context.
The title gardener is given to some mercenaries living in Pikasi/Abu Antik or in its vicinity, because these people tended specifically to date palm orchards and not to fields of barley as other mercenaries would do. This is why they are designated as gardeners. And we have to understand that Pikasi was in the Babylonian countryside. And our current hypothesis is that Abu Antik was an administrative center for a military colony. And after the Babylonian expansion under Hammurabi of Babylon around 1760 BCE, the Babylonian army had grown and it incorporated mercenaries and their families from conquered kingdoms. These mercenary foreigners acted as soldiers for the Babylonian kingdom. They were settled on the countryside in towns like Pikasi and villages around it, where they received land in return for military service, corvée duties, and taxes. And we see all sorts of people from outside of Babylonia proper living in this military colony of Abu Antik Pikasi. So we see Europeans, people from Malgium, Turukians from current-day Kurdistan, Kassites from what is now Iran, Elamites. Some of these soldiers are called in the text gardeners because they tended specifically to date palm orchards, which they got from the Babylonian state in return for their military service.
That's quite an interesting arrangement. Could you tell us more about that?
It's something that's familiar to Assyriologists. It's called the Ilkum. And the way I interpret the Ilkum is a combination of duties and prerogatives. So the prerogative that you receive, that the Babylonian kingdom bestows upon you, is that you get to live in the Babylonian kingdom and you have some real estate, some property, usually an orchard or a field that you can work. And your duties were to go on a military campaign, typically once a year when the king would go on a campaign. You would have to do corvée duties like digging canals, and you had to pay your local taxes. And in the texts, those people are typically called just soldiers, but in the case of Pikasi Abu Antik, because apparently there were lots of date palm orchards, these mercenary men that were settled in the province were called gardeners, because even though they went on a military campaign like once a year, what they did for most of the year was tending to their date palms.
It sounds like a good way for the king to keep people who could potentially have caused him problems busy with something more productive instead.
Exactly. And at the same time, while tending the date palm orchards, they also had to pay their taxes to the kings.
It sounds like they're also deliberately being kept away from the cities, the main power centres of the kingdom.
This is what I think. You wouldn't want to have large groups of soldiers from outside of your kingdom living in your main cities. So what the Babylonian kings could do was just dig a new canal somewhere in the steppe and make a new settlement. This is what has been done throughout Babylonian history.
Was this a privilege or a punishment?
I suppose a bit of both. At least they got a livelihood from the Babylonian state, but they had to live on the countryside. I'm not sure if they weren't allowed actually in the big cities like Kish or Babylon, but they were certainly not settled permanently around those big cities. And you can see the same for the Judeans, for example, who were deported to Babylonia under Nebuchadnezzar II. They were also settled in the countryside of Iraq to work for the Babylonian kingdom.
You've been able to connect texts looted at the start of the 20th century with other texts excavated at the site almost 100 years later. How do you do something like that?
By linking the content of text with each other that are belonging to the same period. It's easy to know about the tablet, especially tablet of Abu Antik, can find people and their relation between. And by comparison with text come from same region, for example, the reign of Saint Suilona, we found a similarity of text in everything except the day of writing the tablets.
Having identified the texts as belonging to the same general group, there's still more work to be done in identifying individuals as well, isn't there? It's not unusual, like today, for people to have the same name as each other.
Of course, there's the same name of people that be difficult to say that people are same, but by the similarity of contexts and what percentage, 50% or 70%, sometime, as I said, it's only differences day of writing tablet.
This way of working is very successful, but it's also very lengthy and painstaking, isn't it? There's a lot of work to be done to pull together the groups in the first place.
Exactly. And a problem with the Tel Abu Antik texts is that on the one hand, you have the old group that is spread throughout the world in collections like Yale, and not everything has been published yet. Another thing is that the texts that were found by the Iraqi expedition were published piecemeal by BA students, MA students, PhD students, and the texts were distributed to those different people in what almost seems like haphazardly. So they were not given as archival groups or certain dossiers that belong together. No. If somebody had to write a PhD on Abu Antik, then that person would get some sale documents, a couple of letters, or an administrative text. And you would find in somebody else's PhD thesis the same type of texts from the same archive, but they're typically not studied as a group. So this is a job that Jacob, I hope, will also focus on, is to look at those Iraqi theses and to reconstruct the groups as they were found actually in the field.
One thing, Rients and John, when I starting to work on Abu Antik tablets and decide to complete my career on same group of texts, I have worked on a database for the studied text. With a database, I found, unfortunately, as Rients mentioned, a group of texts found in a jar, studied, unfortunately, separately. 3 in this dissertation, 3 or 2 as article, without studied in contexts. It's very important I can find the relation between them, because one of the group of texts had a different date formula, because some of them belong Hammurabi, Samsuilon and Abishuk in same time. This can give us, this is an archive for a family, can find something new on this family. It's very important and nice to find in one jar group of texts belong to 3 kings.
This is new information to me even, so I'm glad to hear this, Jacob, that apparently an archive was found in a jar.
That's a good example of one of the main advantages of properly excavated material, because it's not like an expert can just pick up a tablet, read it, and that will tell them everything they might possibly want to know.
Absolutely. Context is very important. It's not everything, but you need the tablet and its context to draw the full spectrum of historical information from it.
And one of the challenges in working with material that hasn't been properly excavated is that even when you have material that is generally related, it doesn't necessarily come from the same place.
The tablet that come from the southern Babylon, Yakhrurum Shablum, I think it's not only from Abu Antique, it's from the region somewhere around, because one of the texts come from Yakhrurum Shablum that come from Tel Masbah. Tel Masbah now is removed by modern canal. I have visited the site before, maybe 2 years ago. There is 12 letters that published by Edzard. It's the same content for the tablet of Pikasi and other tablets from Yakhrurum Shablum. That give us an idea. The region of southern Babylonia can imagine it as with one lifestyle. They depending on the agricultural economy and working in fields, or like Rients said, they are soldiers and then started working in their field or their orchards.
Do we know what happened to Pikasi? Why does the documentation end?
Well, I have a hypothesis about this, because the last dated texts that were found at Abu Antique are from the first 3 years of Amiditana. So that's about 100 years after it was for the first time settled with foreign mercenaries. And at the time of Amiditana, the Babylonian kingdom was at war intermittently with the Sealand dynasty to its south. And it appears that Abu Antique and its military colony were at the front line. And I suspect that Abu Antique and Pikasi somehow were involved in the war against the Sealand dynasty, and that the site was abandoned, perhaps even burned, at the beginning of the reign of Amiditana. That's what I believe. Maybe Jacob has other ideas or suggestions about the end of Abu Antique.
I think the end for Abu Antique that the water covered the site, because only in Old Babylonian Pikasi was mentioned. After that, never mentioned in any texts. I think this belongs the nature of the area, because this area attested for the marshlands from the 4th millennium BC. This is a viewpoint, I think, come from one of the Iraqi students that worked with Tony Wilkinson. And I don't know from where bring this idea, but had an idea of this region covered by water from the 4th millennium BC and still continue. I think this reason make people there to leave Abu Antique and other sites. I have visited this area many times when I working in Diwania Inspectorate. I found occupation for the 1st millennium around Abu Antique in Tel Khesh and Tel Zghaitan, very few on the surface. But in Tel Khesh, there is a Sasanian occupation. Even the Tel Jghaiman. Jghaiman is the north Abu Antique, is very big site. There's an occupation belong to first millennium, second half of first millennium BC. I think the nature may be the reason for that.
What are your plans for future work on these texts?
I would like to talk on my project and my PhD plan. The future of Abu Antique text. I plan for this large group of texts, mainly to find a very good topic of a dissertation. My project divided into two parts. I'm working on the administrative text and letters will be a main topic for a PhD dissertation. Then working on the rest of the text as a research project, including the large collection of the school text. I think the school text of Abu Antique is very, very important because it's very large group, and I think it's very important to know the level of education and knowledge circulating in that region. That will be a project or a joint project with my colleagues like Rients, Boer, because he interested in this group of texts in this region. And together I have a very good idea about that because we read almost all of Abu Antique texts that studied by Iraqi colleagues. We plan to find a new cooperation. He started already to find something in Leiden, some time to spend it there to work together as preliminary working on that.
How can we follow your work? Do you have social media accounts, for example?
I don't have any social media accounts, but I do have an academia account, like a lot of scholars, where people can find my articles.
Same here. I have only Twitter and never use it. Very few time on Twitter. I have academia, LinkedIn, only that. I don't have time for social media.
I know what you mean. Well, thank you both very much indeed. That's really impressive work, and it's such a wonderful collaboration.
Thank you, John. Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Thank you, John. It was our pleasure.
I'd also like to thank our new patrons, Tyler Russell, Enrique Jimenez, Haider Al-Rakabi, Jana Matuszak, Nancy Hycock, and JC. I really appreciate your support. It makes a big difference. And thank you for listening to Thin End of the Wedge. If you enjoy what we do, please consider supporting us via Patreon. That's patreon.com/wedgepod. Even a couple of pounds a month helps keep the podcast going and brings us closer to the point where we can make proper translations into Middle Eastern languages. You can also support us in other ways. Simply subscribe to the podcast. Leave us a 5-star review on iTunes or your podcatcher of choice. Recommend us to your friends. Follow us on Twitter @wedge_pod. If you want the latest podcast news, you can sign up for our newsletter. You can find all the links in the show notes and on our website at wedgepod.org. wedgepod.org. Thanks, and I hope you'll join us next time.